Summer can be a bit of a slog. For us, it's often for some reason a rather busy time, and I'm sure we're not alone.
Well, you can beat the summertime sadness and the August angst and enhance your everyday with our excellent sponsor, Via Hemp. This is a company that crafts award-winning premium THC and THC-free gummies.
Each of these gummies is especially designed to cultivate a specific mood. Whether you're looking to get relaxed, get quality sleep, get creative, or just to get focused. If you're 21 or older, you can experience it for yourself and get 15% off your first order with our exclusive code MSheet at viahemp.com. That's VIIAHEMP.com.
I personally enjoyed their grapefruit flow state gummies. This CBG and CBD powerhouse really helped me tap into my productivity. Like, we have had an extremely busy summer, and I feel flow state got me over the finish line a few times when I was editing multiple episodes a day, digging through documents, and knocking out a bunch of interviews.
Via Hemp does not require a medical card, and it ships legally to all 50 states. It's also affordable, and even more so for Murder Sheet listeners who get a special deal.
If you're 21 and older, head to viahemp.com and use code MSheet to receive 15% off. That's VIIAHEMP.com and use code MSheet at checkout. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Enhance your everyday with Via.
Temp check. What kind of summer are we having this year? A family road trip summer? A beach bum summer? Or a wake me up when the sun sets summer? With Instacart, choose your own adventure and skip the shopping side quests. Where available, you can get ice cream delivered to your hotel, sunscreen to the pool, or cold brew to your bed. Well, door, in as fast as 30 minutes. Wherever you find yourself this summer, you can get the goods. Download Instacart for free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum $10 per order. Excludes restaurants. Additional terms and fees apply.
Have you ever covered a carpet stain with a rug, ignored a leaky faucet, pretended your half-painted living room is supposed to look like that? Well, you're not alone. We've all got unfinished home projects. But there's an easier way. Thumbtack is the app that makes it easier to care for your home. Pull out your phone and in just a few taps, search, chat, and book highly rated pros right in your neighborhood. Download Thumbtack and start caring for your home the easier way.
Content warning, this episode contains discussion of the murder of 2 girls as well as suicide.
So I'm sure all of you remember that back on March 18th, there was a pretty long hearing in this case, which focused largely on the issue of contempt, or to be more precise, did the defense team of Andrew Baldwin and Brad Rosie commit contempt of court in relationship to the leak of crime scene pictures? I'm sure you also remember that after this hearing, or rather as this hearing was ending, both attorneys, David Hennessy for Rosie and Baldwin and Prosecutor Nick McLeland for the people, were given the opportunity to provide the court memos in which they discuss their own interpretation of what the law is and what was pertinent about all of this. So it's a couple of weeks later. Both of those memos have been released. And so we thought it would be a good idea for us to take a few minutes and talk about them with you.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases. We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is The Delphi Murders, Contempt Memoranda.
So I'd like to start out by saying something which will probably get me, frankly, in trouble.
Uh-oh.
Sometimes on this program, well, we always strive to be fair. We always try to call it as we see it. And so that means sometimes we say things that get interpreted as being pro-prosecution. And then people who fall more along the defense side of things accuse us of being pro-prosecution. We're biased. Other times we've said things that seem to be critical of the prosecution. And then people say, oh, no, they're obviously pro-defense. This is awful. Just less than a month ago, I was surprised the way we'd covered the story was brought up, and someone actually said it's well known that the murder sheet is ride or die defense.
Using some Fast and Furious terminology there.
So, and I preface what I'm about to say with that because I think this is something that I could see potentially upsetting both sides.
We love to do that.
So let's assume for a moment that the leak of crime scene photos happened the way attorneys Rosie and Baldwin say it did. Let's assume that it was an unintentional leak on their behalf and that it was leaked out without their knowledge. Now, with that said, I think Anya and I have been very clear. We think this leak of graphic crime scene photos is a travesty. It's terrible, deserves to be taken very, very seriously. And I'm not stepping back from that for a second. But with that said, if it's an unintentional leak, I am not entirely sure in my mind if that rises to the level of contempt. Now, if it's an intentional leak, yes. But if it's an unintentional leak, I'm not sure that rises to the level of contempt.
I completely agree with everything you just said.
So with that in mind, I think previously I've said that my bias in the Richard Allen case is I want to see really great lawyering on both sides, because that way when the trial is over, we can say whatever the verdict is, it's a good verdict. And so I had that bias going into this pretrial hearing on contempt. I really wanted to see great lawyering on both sides so that whenever Judge Go reached her decision, I could be confident that she'd had some great arguments to ponder as she reached it. And so what I'm saying is, what I'm struggling to say here is that didn't happen.
Nope.
I was really, really surprised, and not in a good way, with the performance of David Hennessy. I felt that there were some potentially really good and strong arguments he could have made, which he did not make. I felt he seemed unsure of himself. He was mispronouncing names. It wasn't clear why he was doing things. He was calling YouTubers these for no apparent reason. One of the witnesses he called gets into a fight outside the courthouse. And let me say this, since the hearing, I've had the opportunity to think about it. I've talked about it with attorneys, both prosecutors and defense attorneys. And I think we've figured out what they were trying to do. There is a doctrine in the law called unclean hands. And I'm really going to simplify it. But basically, it means if you go into a situation with unclean hands, that means you've acted badly. And so then you don't really get the chance to complain if other people act badly. It's a gross oversimplification. So I think that's what he wanted to do. And I think he wanted to pinpoint the alleged leak of information about the bullet to Gary Baudet. I think he wanted to pinpoint that as a sign that the prosecutor must have definitely linked that. Therefore, he had unclean hands.
It must have definitely leaked that, right?
Yes, he must have definitely leaked that out. And so therefore, how can he complain about leaks? He has unclean hands.
Okay.
An interesting argument. I think that's what he was trying to do. But not once in the courtroom that day did he utter the phrase unclean hands. And not once in the memo do I see the phrase unclean hands.
Yeah.
And that's just an example. I really was. If I were Andrew Baldwin and Brad Rosie, I would really feel ill-served by the quality of representation they received that day.
Oh my God. Yeah. Geez. I mean, can I just add as a layperson, I mean, this was a performance that was pretty stunningly muddled. Like, I guess we had seen Hennessy in action at a previous hearing when when Rosie and Baldwin were being actively kicked off. He got up. He was concise, forceful, assured. He said some things that I found compelling. And it was like, wow, okay. So I was expecting that version of Hennessy. That's not what we got. It was a mess, frankly, as you described. But I sort of thought maybe this post-hearing memorandum from him would be an opportunity for him to maybe circle back around, maybe come back to some of these points, emphasize them, and explain more about what he meant, and perhaps get some things in there that didn't quite come off during the hearing, sort of a chance to course correct. And yeah.
Why don't you give us some big picture stuff as to what you thought about his memorandum? And then there's a couple of things I wanted to highlight in it.
Well, this post-hearing memorandum, which was filed on March 25th, just feels like an extension of the hearing itself. It as a document, as I'm reading it, it rambles a lot. We kind of are jumping from point to point. Much like the hearing, it includes some things that I think there's a good idea there. And perhaps like if you keep going down that road, you're getting somewhere. And then it swerves off path into the swamp of YouTube, essentially. I feel like a lot of this, the problem has been, it's like we're walking in the right direction, and then the shiny butterfly of YouTube flits from the bushes, and then you go running after that. That's what I'm seeing with this. It's like, I mean, he starts out, in my opinion, well in saying, essentially, this is, the state didn't really prove contempt. That's not what it is. And I think that's the road to go down.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons it is so frustrating to me is, as I say, if we assume that Baldwin and Rosie did not leak these pictures intentionally, then it is not clear to me that this is contempt. So I was really looking to see better arguments. And frankly, the two of them deserved better arguments. So I don't know if that counts as me being pro-defense because I think they deserved better or whatever. But I think they were ill-served here.
They were ill-served. This was, I mean, it was just, and then, so we start off well, and we start off with some examples of like, here's what it's not, here's some problems. So I feel like things are going well. And at some point, I
have something I want to talk about at the bottom of page 3.
Let's get into it.
Okay, I'm going to read from the bottom of page 3. Quote, "The most egregious leak was the detailed probable cause affidavit to search Logan's property," unquote. So first of all, first of all, as I say, there's an argument to be made that what happened in October was not contempt. That is not what that is an argument to be made.
Is it even maybe a good argument to be made?
Yes. But I think if you're saying that an alleged leak of a probable cause affidavit is more egregious than the leak of graphic crime scene photos
of children,
then you are living in a different reality. And I think it really wrecks your credibility.
There's been such an attempt on, I would say, from pro-defense talking heads to minimize this leak in a way that I find very telling. I think there's a very different, I think there's an impulse to essentially be like, what's the big deal? And I don't know if I really find that super compelling or respectful, given that essentially as we're going to get to later, we've recently seen the sort of final manifestation of how bad this leak has gotten. And we'll talk more about that momentarily, I'm sure. But when you have people essentially minimizing the pain of two families and anyone who cared about these girls, because these horrific photos are now out there and in the hands of unscrupulous people, frankly, then I feel like you're perhaps maybe too callous with your talking points. It feels callous. It feels pretty cold. I don't think that's compelling to most people. I think a better way of framing it is, listen, Rosie and Baldwin are also really devastated that this happened. And they don't like that it happened. It's just not their fault. It's not something you can blame them for because somebody chose to do this, and that somebody is Mitch Westerman. The moral blame lies on him, not them.
Yeah, that's
a compelling argument.
That's a compelling argument. That'd be like saying, if you get robbed, if you get mugged, I blame you for it. You could say Andrew Baldwin is the victim of a crime.
And that you, in order to make that argument, you don't need to minimize what happened. What happened can just be just as bad. It's just not anybody's fault, or it's not the people who are being blamed in this situation's fault. That's a good argument to make. And I think it's, I don't know, there's sort of seems to be this kind of chorus of people who sort of come out and do the whole song and dance on behalf of the defense, you know, on social media and within the media. And I think there's just kind of like maybe a bit of a bubble going on there where they're not necessarily realizing how they sound.
I want to continue where I was from the bottom of page 3. Quote, "The most egregious leak was the detailed probable cause affidavit to search Logan's property. Sergeant Holman testified he asked Barbara where she got, and she said from Logan. However, he also testified the search warrant affidavit is never left with the person, just a copy of the search warrant. Thus, Barbara's statement had to be false. That affidavit also had murder sheet overlaid on every page. Sergeant Holman never asked the murder sheet people about it and never did any further investigation as to the source," end quote. So a couple of things there.
Okay, can I just say this is a minor thing? You should write the person's full name out on first mention. I mean, I'm sorry. Maybe that's the journalist in me, but this is driving me crazy. You know?
Well, I guess the argument would be that in the testimony, maybe she wasn't identified as Barbara.
I don't
McDonald.
know. The whole thing is just this is written in such a sloppy format. It just feels unprofessional.
So first of all, Holman testified that they never leave the probable cause affidavit with the person. So therefore, how could Logan possibly have gotten it? Well, you know, maybe they don't leave it with the person, but I'm not going to say anything about our sources, but I think in the Delphi online community, it is pretty well known that Ron Logan got copies of this from his attorney and that he distributed them.
One thing that baffles me is that it feels like Hennessy is trying to do some sort of bizarre locked room mystery style thing with the Logan affidavit, but it's like doing a locked room mystery of how could they have gotten in? How could the killer have arrived in this locked room? And then you find out that there's a very clearly marked back door into the room that was unlocked the whole time. It's like, yeah, that's probably how.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. As I say, a person's lawyer gets a copy of all those papers, so it's misleading.
Is the lawyer allowed to give the person their documents? So that's not a leak.
Yeah, so it's misleading to suggest, since they didn't give Ron Logan the affidavit at the time of the search, Barbara must be lying, or why didn't he ask the murder sheet people about it? And also, first of all, and again, this is not an egregious leak, and second of all, it has nothing to do with the events being analyzed.
Also, what's hilarious to me is that he seems to think that Barbara McDonald got the version that we had where we put our watermark on it. So that's kind of odd. So he's saying, I think those are I think we both got copies at some point, but we put our watermark on it so that people would know that it came from us, because we were trying to essentially say, this is the version we're putting out there. If we put some sort of mark identifying it as ours, then we can take the blame for anything that's out there that came from it. We can essentially show, here's, we redacted these portions. If other people release versions that have more information, then, it's not going to be blamed on us.
And again, if you're trying to make an unclean hands argument, this just blunts the argument, because you would focus like a laser on the claim about Gary Bodette knowing about the bullet before the PCA was released.
Yes, you would, because that's a relevant one-for-one comparison. We can argue about how valid it is, and really if it does mean anything. But at the very least, if
and also it happened after the arrest of Richard Allen.
It's just so dumb to be focusing on this. I'm sorry. It just speaks to somebody who doesn't like. It's just more of trying to kick up dirt in the water rather than actually like catch some fish.
This whole thing, I mean, I can just say it till I'm blue in the face. I'm baffled. I was really shocked.
I'm just surprised that nobody like helped him with this after his performance at the hearing. I guess that would have been something to maybe really stick the landing on the memo at least.
I wanted to read something else that jumped out at me. This is from page 6. Additionally, Sergeant Holman and Mr. Mullins testified that they were aware that Mr. McLeland was exchanging information with Gary Baudet, the most prodigious leaker of all, end quote. So first of all, that's not my recollection of the testimony. My recollection of the testimony is that Holman and Mullen indicated they knew that McLeland had received messages from Gary Baudet, not that any information was being given from McLeland to Baudet. And then no matter what you think of Gary Baudet, also known as Fig Solves, it's completely inaccurate to call him the most prodigious leaker of all.
Because he's not part of the investigation.
Yes. So Nick McLeland can leak. Andrew Baldwin can leak. Judge Gull can leak. Anybody involved in the case can leak. We on the outside can receive leaks.
And put out and publish leaks.
Yes. But we're not leakers.
Yeah. Gary Baudet's not a leaker unless he's some sort of undercover FBI agent who's been, for some reason, embedded in YouTube all this time. And he's not. You know, it's really...
As far as we know.
As far as we know. At this point, it's one of those things where I just feel like there's a point with some of these things where making assertions that kind of twist the facts at some point just tumble into the misinformation or, I dare I say, lie category for me. And this is one of those things. I find some of this shocking.
If I were David Hennessy, I would say the most prodigious leaker of all was Mitch Westerman.
Well, because again, you should be, I don't know why they're not, I don't know what.
You can say what happened with the crime scene pictures was terrible and we feel sick about it, but it's not our fault.
I don't know why you're not throwing Mitch Westerman under the bus in this thing, because that would be the strategy that makes sense. So I don't know why you wouldn't. Also, if we're to believe that this was his doing and he bears the moral responsibility, then he egregiously breached the trust of a close friend and former colleague in a way that he should have known would cause incredible damage to all those involved, especially his friend. So I don't know why you're pulling punches on Mitch Westerman at this point when you're the defense. I don't know why. That baffles me.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so again, I don't know if this is pro-defense or pro-prosecution. I think Andrew Baldwin and Brad Rosie deserved a better defense than they received in this case from David Hennessy.
Well, and one thing that's kind of interesting about this to note is that, it doesn't seem like David Hennessy is too keen on clearing out at this point. Like he's maybe going to be involved with other stuff that we'll talk about later, not in this episode, but
later
another time.
So I think I've said all I wanted to say about this. Is it more stuff you wanted to say, or do you want to move on to McLeland's?
I think we can move on to McLeland's. We should note that there was kind of a bizarre appendix that Hennessy also filed that seems to mostly be sort of like confusing and hard to follow impressions of mostly what seems to be communications between Mark Cohen and R, who was the person who Mitch Westerman sent things to. It's a bit hard to follow, and there's not really any point in reading it because I'm sure it's maybe to like help organize exhibits or something. I don't know. But that's also there.
Okay, it's time to commit. 2024 is the year for prioritizing yourself. Begin your new smile journey with Byte, and you could start seeing results in just 2 to 3 weeks. Just order your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95 at Byte.com. Byte clear liners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces, plus they offer financing options, accept eligible insurance, and you could pay with your HSA, FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
This episode is sponsored by AutoTrader. Credit scores, down payments, interest rates. Car buying can be a numbers game, but you don't have to be a math expert to get the keys to your dream car. Just use Kelley Blue Book My Wallet on AutoTrader. Crunch your numbers and get your personalized results so you know exactly how much you'll pay each month for your car. It's like having a magic wand for your wallet. Presto! The car you've been wanting is now within reach. So hit the road and leave your calculator at home. Find your next car on autotrader.com.
If you're shopping while working, eating, or even listening to this podcast, then you know and love the thrill of the hunt. But are you getting the thrill of the best deals? Rakuten shoppers do. They get the brands they love with the most savings and cash back. And you can get it too. Start getting cash back at your favorite stores like Urban Outfitters, Samsung, and Adidas, and even stack sales on top of cash back. It's easy to use and you get your cash back through PayPal or check. The idea is simple. Stores pay Rakuten for sending them shoppers, and Rakuten shares the money with you as cash back. Download the free Rakuten app and never miss a deal. Or go to Rakuten.com to start getting the most bang for your buck. That's RAKUTEN.
So now I guess we can go on to the state's memorandum in support of contemptuous conduct, which was filed today when we're recording April 1st, 2024.
And I'm going to ask Anya to read, I think, all of Section 2, and keep in mind that there is a person who is named in this section who we have not publicly named on this program and who we refer to as R. And as Anya is reading this, she will continue to refer to him as R.
Certainly. 2, contemptuous conduct. Or I should say, quote, 2, contemptuous conduct. The exhibits that the state put into evidence support the contemptuous conduct on the part of Brad Rosie and Andrew Baldwin outlined in the state's information for contemptuous conduct. The deception to the court began in November of 2022, when both Brad Rosie and Andrew Baldwin told the court that a gag order was not necessary because they had no intentions to talk to the media about the case. Within a week, both Brad Rosie and Andrew Baldwin published a press release to media outlets. Brad Rosie testified at the contempt proceedings that this was to curry favor with his client. It is clear that the press release was to curry favor with the public. Although it was not a violation of any gag order, it was a preview into future contempt shown to the court by showing blatant dishonesty. The next act of indiscretion was an email from Andrew Baldwin to Brandon Woodhouse. This email was a violation of the gag order. The email released information from discovery to a member of the public. That member of the public then further disseminated information protected by the gag order by putting it on the internet for the world to consume. While the content in that email may not be egregious to the court, the fact that Andrew Baldwin and Brad Rosie hid their error from the court until it was found by the state is egregious, showing yet another example of the defense deceiving the court. Finally, the defense intentionally and knowingly leaked information to the public in the form of crime scene photos and other discovery protected by the gag order and the protective order. The state admitted screenshots of text messages between Mark Cohen and R, neither of which are involved in this case in any way, nor are they employees or team members of anyone involved in this case. While these screenshots are voluminous, they paint a clear picture. R speaks about information that is only privy to the defense. R talks about it within days of the defense receiving discovery from the state. R has copies of the crime scene photos. He knows when defense is working on certain aspects of the case, and he knows about the oral interview with Professor Turco 3 days after the recorded statement is turned over to the defense. The defense states that Mitch Westerman broke into their office and stole the pictures and then released them to R. It is clear from the messages between Mark Cohen and R that R received the crime scene photos and other discovery from Mitch Westerman. It is also clear that Mitch Westerman was feeding R several other pieces of discovery all the way up until October 2nd, 2023. The leak was recurring. It is also clear from the text messages between Mark Cohen and R that the strategy to leaking the information is to gauge the public opinion of the leak information. It was an effort by the defense to put the information out to the public to gauge their response of the defense's theory of the case. This would allow the defense to change that strategy if the public response wasn't the one they thought was beneficial. The screenshots from the iCloud account of Mitch Westerman. The screenshots are of text messages between Mitch Westerman and Andy. Again, the messages are voluminous, but if the court will read through them, the court will clearly see that Andy is Andrew Baldwin. In the text, Andy talks about writing the Franks memo and how it is a huge endeavor on his part. In other messages, Andy encourages Mitch Westerman to reach out to the media and push their narrative. Andy further states that he has already been in touch with Dateline and spoke to them. All of this is a violation of the gag order by Andrew Baldwin and the defense. When the state was notified of the leaked crime scene photos in early October 2023, the defense was on a phone conference with the court and gave the court the explanation that Mitch Westerman broke in and stole the photos. When interviewed by the Indiana State Police, Andrew Baldwin stated that he gave the Franks memo to Mitch Westerman to review. Then at the hearing on March 18, 2024, the defense implied that Mitch Westerman is now a consultant of the defense, and any communication between Mitch Westerman and Andrew Baldwin should be considered work product. The defense has consistently altered Mitch Westerman's involvement in this case. Why didn't the defense make the court and the state aware on the October 10th, 2023 phone call that Mitch Westerman was a consultant and that he had access to discovery? It is the state's belief that the defense was trying to conceal or diminish Mitch Westerman's role in the leak. A reasonable person can deduce that the defense was trying to hide the fact that the defense was intentionally leaking information. Once the state was notified of the leak, an investigation began where the state began to gather evidence. As the state got closer to the source of the leak, the defense changed their story from Mitch Westerman being a criminal who broke into their office and stole discovery to Mitch Westerman being a consultant, assisting on the Delphi case whose communication with the defense is protected work product. The defense intentionally violated the court's orders and leaked discovery information in an effort to push their narrative out to the public to gauge public response. This was a strategic move by the defense in violation of the court's orders. The crime scene pictures specifically continue to cause havoc across the internet and re-victimize the families of those involved. As recently as March 28, 2024, a YouTuber posted the leaked crime scene pictures on his channel to the public and ultimately to the world. That YouTube video made it back to the family, re-traumatizing them. It has become known that the YouTuber forwarded the pictures on to other YouTubers, and they continue to be posted on the World Wide Web. Despite the state and investigators spending countless hours trying to track down all the various outlets the pictures and discovery were leaked to, the damage done by the leaked crime scene photos seems to be ongoing.
Unquote. So there is a lot to unpack there. First of all, you will note that I kept on saying that if Rosie and Baldwin were not intentionally leaking crime scene pictures, I wasn't sure if it was contempt. Obviously, if they were involved in intentionally leaking these images, then it is contempt. And so I was struck by the fact that in this document, Nick McLeland says bluntly, the defense intentionally and knowingly leaked information to the public in the form of crime scene photos. Were you surprised by that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the most concrete we've gotten from the prosecution side about how they believed that this was intentional and why.
Yes. And some of that is from communications they have, which we don't have, indicating that the purpose of leaking information was to basically test market it.
So I mean, I don't really want to come to any final conclusions about any of this because I haven't seen these texts. So this is obviously the prosecution's interpretations of communications between Baldwin and Westerman. So when I'm discussing this, I'm kind of keeping an open mind about it as a result of not being able to see them and review them myself. I just prefer to be able to see things before drawing a conclusion. That being said, if Nick McLeland is accurately describing that in these messages, Baldwin encourages Westerman to reach out to the media and push their narrative, then that is really, really, that's bad. That's a very bad, that's not good considering what happened.
Yes, that is basically putting the lie to the contention that they didn't want to try it in the media, because that would be trying it in the media and intentionally putting information out. And again, we haven't seen these messages.
Well, it's not just that, but frankly, it makes it look like the defense was using Westerman in order to put out stuff that was not allowed to be out. And then it creates the impression that could that have happened with these crime scene photos where Mitch Westerman was essentially acting upon orders.
And that raises some interesting questions. Some people have been critical of R acting like he was behaving in a rogue fashion, but perhaps that wasn't the case. I'm just thinking out loud.
Well, if this was an organized and purposeful leak on the part of the defense, then people like R, who were essentially getting this down line, certainly are absolved of much responsibility of any of this, because they're essentially people who get caught up in a wider machination.
Yes, and as you were careful to keep saying if, I keep saying if, because we haven't seen these messages. We're just basing it on how they have been presented by one side.
Yeah, and I refuse to come down and say, oh, well, this must be true just because the prosecution says it. I don't know. I would have to look at the messages.
And this also is why I'd really love for Baldwin and Rosie to be represented by a better attorney who could do a better job of getting to the truth of some of this stuff. Because if I'm sure they have another side, and God knows what it is, because David Hennessy hasn't shared it with us.
Well, frankly, I mean, I think Hennessy should have known that they were going to break out this stuff about the messages. And perhaps it would have been a better idea for him, instead of spending time, frolicking about Fort Wayne with Julie Melvin the night before, maybe figure out what you're going to say about Westerman and how you're going to represent him, because that seems to be an important portion of this. And I think you need to walk a fine line between explaining, I was sharing things with my friend sort of offhandedly, and that was technically okay, versus like I was telling my friend to do, media greasing for me when I'm not allowed to do it. I think you're going to need to really figure out what to say there about that in order to explain that. I think that's important. Having a bunch of YouTubers who are like desperate for attention get up there and then get immediately asked to leave because they're not relevant. That was not a good use of his time during that hearing.
That did not help Baldwin and Rosie.
No, it did not help his clients. But, I guess he got to frolic around Fort Wayne the night before, as we saw.
Yeah.
I would say that, I think a good defense in this situation is anticipating some of these things from McLeland and trying to get ahead of them and diffuse them. I think that is a good defense. I think it's a better defense to come out and say, well, they're going to bring up that he told Mitch Westerman to do this, but they were just talking and throwing around ideas. It wasn't meant as like an order. That would be something to get ahead and diffuse, instead of what they were trying to do, obviously, was basically have it both ways. He victimized us. He's a criminal. Mitch Westerman just totally randomly did this, but also he's a trusted consultant who is relied upon for his trial strategy, advice, and people call him for advice all the time. So you can't use any of this because it's work product. They were trying to have it both ways. You don't diffuse it that way. You diffuse it by dealing with it and putting it aside.
And you don't diffuse things by denying the obvious. Everyone knows that the leak of graphic crime scene photos of children is certainly more egregious than a man sharing copies of a search warrant affidavit.
Yeah. I think that's pretty obvious to anybody who's not just trying to stretch in order to be on one side or another. And again, I don't even think that is a pro-prosecution or a pro-defense talking point. It's just acknowledging the seriousness, and then prosecution versus defense is who is to blame. And I don't feel like he did a good job defending from that, because I think some of the stuff that McLeland puts in now raises all sorts of questions. And yeah.
McLeland is saying it was intentional, and McLeland is saying, furthermore, that this one he couches a bit, This one he couches a bit. He says it's intentional, and furthermore, a reasonable person could conclude that they were deliberately covering it up.
That is lawyer speak for we don't have evidence, but we strongly suspect.
Yeah.
That's lawyer speak, because he's not coming out and saying it. And I suspect if there was direct evidence, that would be in here. It's not.
And certainly reading between the lines, some people wondered, why is McLeland going to such extent to file a contempt of court if it was an unintentional thing in a gray area?
Obviously, he believes it wasn't.
But yeah, we now know that he believes this was all intentional, and that would certainly explain why he would pursue it as vigorously as he had. I think before we...
Well, I want to say this, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
We've been hard on Hennessy, right? I mean, we've been hard because I don't think he did a good job with any of this. I think he mishandled a lot of this contempt stuff. I don't know how Judge Gull is going to rule, but I went into this thing thinking, I don't know if this will stick, and now I'm not sure anymore, actually. So what I feel with this is the defense themselves, Baldwin and Rosie, have done themselves absolutely no favors with any of this, because they have been visibly, obviously, overtly courting the press at every turn in this whole thing. That's not a criticism necessarily. That is an observation. I don't think anyone can look at this and say differently. You can say that's a good strategy. You can say it's terrible. You could say whatever, anywhere in between. But they have absolutely been courting the press and attempting to try this case in the court of public opinion. There can be strategic reasons for doing that. Let's not even draw any conclusions about whether that's bad or good. But they have. And so when you pair that with these allegations that McLeland includes, it looks worse for them. It just does. Because suddenly it sounds like maybe they went further than anyone saw, but it's still within line. It's still in line with their behavior. And frankly, this is not a situation where they're accusing lawyers who've been really quiet and, are not citing YouTubers in their actual court filings for whatever reason, and are not bringing up YouTubers to come do, amateur boxing matches outside of courthouses or speak and ramble on for a few seconds before getting kicked off the stand. I mean, they've created an impression of themselves which matches some of these accusations. And that's a problem. That's a problem when then you're saying, no, we didn't actually do this.
Very well said. I believe before we go, you mentioned earlier you wanted to mention something about the YouTube.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is awful, but I mean, we've already read it out. So, March 28th, it looks like a YouTuber who we're not naming put the photos on YouTube. And the video has since been taken down. But they're up there, and it sounds like they got back to the families pretty quickly, and they may have seen things. And I don't know. It's just sad. That shouldn't have happened. But it was inevitable. It was inevitable because once it hit the YouTube pipeline, I think it was a matter of time before it happened. And this is why when you hear that, I mean, hopefully you can understand that we think it's a big deal, not because it's good or bad for one side. We think it's a big deal because there is a human cost to seeing something like that of somebody you love.
And when people say, oh, it's not a leak, it's a drip, and try to make light of it or minimize it or say a piece of paperwork shared by a man who received it legally is worse, it shows a shocking lack of human compassion. Think of someone close to you that you love with all of your heart, and think of having them taken away from you in a terrible, violent manner. And then think of going to your computer and seeing pictures of them in a way that you'd never want to see. And this is what's happening to people in this case. And that's not a drip. That's a tragedy.
That is a tragedy. And there's no reason to minimize it because you can basically say it's a bad thing and nobody should be faulted for it, or nobody in this situation should be faulted for it. There's a very easy rhetorical out, which is to acknowledge the harm done and say, but the people who are being accused and who may be punished are innocent of blame here. That is a reasonable argument to make. Why people are not capable of that, or maybe like using a little bit of an emotional intelligence when they're talking about this, I don't know. But I find it troubling, and now basically the worst outcome has happened. And here we are.
That's the thing about this case. The worst outcomes keeps happening.
Yeah.
I think we're going to try to come back in a few days and maybe have a conversation with you about the crowdfunding.
Absolutely. That'll be interesting.
Until then, thank you so much for listening.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.
You've worked hard to build your brand, so why settle for one-size-all-fits branded clothing? Lands' End Outfitters creates apparel your employees will truly want to wear that unites your team in comfort and style. It's clothing that bolsters your brand identity and creates a unique connection between your brand, your employees, and your customers. It's why Lands' End Outfitters has been a supplier of branded apparel to some of the world's most respected brands for more than 30 years. From logo polos to fully customized branded wardrobes, our world-class outfitters will partner with you to help your team feel confident on the job and put your brand into action. From logo application to online ordering, Lands' End Outfitters offers seamless solutions that give you peace of mind, all backed by above and beyond expertise. See why Lands' End Outfitters should be your branded apparel partner. Go to business.landsend.com/pod20 and use code POD20 for 20% off your first product. That's business.landsend.com/pod20. Code POD20 for 20% off your first product.